All right, so we are recording. First of all, Dr. Blevins, thanks so much for agreeing to do a showcase for UC, all about communications, law, and ethics. And I know you're going to put in this whole topic of professionalism and social media into this, and I just appreciate this a lot because it's an extremely relevant topic to all high schoolers and middle schoolers and elementary kids here at Euler. And you guys, students, Michael, Andrea, and everyone else that hops on, I appreciate you guys for being here too. And we can kind of just roll from here and just be ready to just discuss. If Dr. Blood has questions, I'll hop in, say my 2 cents, and we can just kind of roll it out. So go ahead, Dr. Blevins, whenever you're ready.
All right, sounds good. For just a short introduction about myself, kind of one thing that Mr. Gericke and I were talking about before we got started is one thing that makes me a little bit different is although I am a professor and head of journalism at the University of Cincinnati, I was also a non-traditional college student. And that, if you're not familiar with that term, non-traditional, it means that I started college by the time that most people were finished with their undergraduate degrees. And that's because I did a tour in the U.S. Army first. I was in the Military Intelligence Corps and served on active duty. And that is one of the ways that I paid for my college education. I grew up in an area in Southern Illinois that was actually pretty poor. And I went to a high school that was a cooperative educational high school, which means that you could work part-time while going to high school. And that's how I got involved in journalism. And even though I left journalism for a little while, when I joined the Army, it's certainly something that I came back to. And I've had opportunity to work in radio and in video production. So I've kind of done it all with media, but it was really that first experience working for not just my high school newspaper, but a newspaper in our local community covering sports. And one thing I would certainly encourage anyone who's interested in journalism, it is experiential by its nature. Get involved and do it. And speaking of experiential, I want to talk today about social media. And I'm curious, but just who we have on the line here, Andrea, Michael, Mr. Gericke. Are all of you on social media?
I'm probably on social media most of the day. Not like completely the whole day, but some of the time when I have free time, I'm on social media. I don't post a lot. I just I lurk and look at people's posts and stuff and react and add comments. That's about it.
Okay. Yeah, there's a little inherent voyeurism with social media. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. What about you?
I've probably spent at least 40 or 60% of my life on social media.
Okay, fair.
That's great.
I'm a social media addict myself, so there's no judgment here.
And I would put myself at a little bit between the Michael and Andrea range. I would say that I used to be very into photography, and I felt like sometimes I would do things just for my Instagram. I feel like everyone in my generation can probably understand that. And I'm definitely in this phase right now of I'll post once a month or so when I'm excited about something, something that my girlfriend and I did, or something that I did over here or there, or just something that makes me happy, trying to definitely get away from the whole needing to post sort of feeling. So I still love it. I love seeing what my friends are up to, but I'm definitely not the whole I need to post everything that I do kind of thing.
Okay. So yeah, Instagram, very, very visual. If I could, Michael and Andrea, what's your favorite social medium?
TikTok.
Okay, I get a lot of that lately. Yes, looking for instant fame on TikTok, or sometimes it's just very entertaining.
Does YouTube count as a social media?
Absolutely, yes.
Probably YouTube.
All right, yeah, where you get to be kind of your own creator, but also has kind of similar appeal to TikTok, I think, in that regard. I'll tell you, my favorite is Twitter, and Twitter isn't the most popular. I think Facebook is probably the most popular for someone of my generation. Facebook is kind of the graying social media at this point. But Twitter, I have found kind of to be the bread and butter of social media for journalist, and it's certainly been a focus of my research. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to put my screen up now. I want to make sure that you all can see it. Are you able to see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. What I want to talk about today is kind of the good and bad of social media. And I'd like to, since we have such a small group here, if we want, we can, treat this conversationally. So, I mean, if you have a question or a comment, feel free to, just turn your mic on and shout it out. I can't see anyone raise their hand or anything anyway, and I'd prefer just to kind of keep it informal since there's just a few of us on the line. And then also, like most professors, I'm in love with the sound of my own voice. And so if you let me, I will talk your ear off. So if you want to get a break from me, feel free to interject. All right. Let's start with what I like to call the professional enhancements of social media. And kind of heard just a little bit of that in some of the examples that you shared. That social media is all about connection and sharing. Checking in to see what our friends and family are up to, sharing our own experiences, showing things that we are interested in and involved in. And it's certainly become a way for journalists to establish their own brand, to put themselves out there. One of the things that we used to talk about in journalism education was how important it was for journalists to have, we called them clips if we were talking about newspaper journalism. If we're talking about television journalism or radio journalism, then it would be about having a reel or samples of your work, something to demonstrate. And social media really provides us a platform to share that on a day-to-day basis, but also to kind of build our own audience. It empowers each of us, whether or not we're journalists, to tell our own stories virtually to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And particularly in relationship to journalism, we can do things technologically that we weren't able to do in the past, such as live streaming an event. We've certainly seen that play out with protests and covering protests, live tweeting an event where we are providing commentary about what we are reporting on, or just simply reporting in real time. That there isn't that delay to go back to the station, edit together the package, put it on the air. We're able to go live with this very mobile platform. And then just in terms of networking, and that's what I really like, particularly about Twitter. And there are some social media that are specifically geared towards journalists. One is Muckrack, and so I have the link to my account there, and it's kind of like your social media CV or your social media resume for journalism. And all of that is, I think, well and good. It has led to a statement that I frankly don't believe in. And social media has certainly provided journalists, as well as everyone, all sorts of great tools to do journalism, to do storytelling. But I don't think that we're all necessarily journalists now. We may have the tools that journalists use, but unless it comes with a journalism education and really a grounding in journalistic ethics and principles, well, for me, you're doing storytelling, but you're not necessarily doing journalism. And we have examples of a lot of people who have done storytelling irresponsibly. And I'm going to share some of those examples in a little bit. And what I'm most concerned about is when journalists use social media poorly. And I will really focus on those examples. And so to me, this is an opportunity for us to think about how we exercise our own sense of self-discretion. One of the things with social media is that you don't always have an editor, a supervisor who is present. There's always a danger when you're doing something live to miss something that you're not able to necessarily fact check in real time. And so we should take a pause and think about how we use social media as a tool for journalism. Think about what it is that we share. Have I verified the source of this particular piece of information? Is it responsible for me to share this? Is it necessary for me to share this? And when we think about social media and networking and connection, sometimes you are defined by who you associate with. And so think about, who do I follow? Who do I retweet? For instance, what does that say about me? And so we have to think about, our participation in, even if it's unwittingly, of, believing hoaxes or furthering hoaxes, sharing fake news or, misinformation, or a phenomenon that I like to refer to as selfie sabotage. And I'll have a few examples of that in just a minute. So let me start with two journalism-specific cases where we had journalists that, at least by the definition and ethical principles of journalism, acted irresponsibly. So here's the first image I want to share with you. Michael or Andrea, do either of you recognize this image?
I have no clue.
I'm sorry?
I have no clue. I don't know what that is.
Okay, you don't have no clue. All right. I'm sorry. How about you, Michael?
It looks like a protest or something.
Okay. This was from a couple of years ago. This was on January 18th at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. We had a group of high school students from Covington Catholic, which is just across the river in Kentucky. And that is the students that you see here. And this image is a little bit blurry. But this particular student is wearing a hat that says "Make America Great Again." It was associated with Donald Trump. And this gentleman here is a Native American and a veteran of the U.S. Army. And there was a video that went viral that day that focused on this group of students around this gentleman. And based on that small clip of video, it appeared as that they were the only aggressors, and they were engaging in chants that seemed to, mock or disparage Native Americans. And you had several people, including journalists, who have been sued for libel since this happened, who posted their opinion about what they perceived to be the poor behavior of these students. And afterwards, a little bit later, a longer video emerged that showed these students. They were waiting for a bus, and they were actually being heckled by another group that was there, that was, I think, known as the Black Hebrew Israelites, that were taunting the students. And it was this gentleman here, Nathan Phelps, that's the Native American gentleman I mentioned, who actually walked into the crowd of the Covington Catholic students, and was cutting through that group. And so I think the lesson for journalists in this case, and really for everyone, but especially for journalists, is that a longer video tells a much different story, and it's very easy to rush to judgment about what the facts are when covering live events. And I'm not saying to necessarily excuse the behavior of the high school students in this case, but certainly the initial reporting on the incident lacked context, if you will. So definitely a pitfall for journalists there, in that rush to provide your hot take, if you will, or in covering live events. I want to look at another case. I doubt you'll be familiar with this one, but maybe you will. This took place in Iowa, and there was an Iowa State University student who was at a football game, and he held up a sign. You can kind of see it here, saying that he needs Busch Light beer. All right. And he provided a Venmo account. And if you're not familiar with Venmo, it is kind of like a social media platform for PayPal. You can have connections, but the idea is a way to be able to exchange money between friends. And so what happened is this particular football game happened to be nationally broadcast. People thought it was funny that this college student was asking for beer money, and they sent in donations to his Venmo that totaled over $1 million. Over $1 million. And the student could have certainly have kept that and bought all the Busch Light beer that his heart desired. But instead, he donated it to a children's hospital. And so this became a national story about, hey, what is a great thing that this student did. There was a newspaper reporter for the Des Moines Register named Aaron Calvin, who was doing a feature story about this young man and his charitable contribution. Aaron says that it was the policy of the Des Moines Register to do a background check on anyone they interviewed on their social media. And this is one of the things about social media is that, you may have certain privacy settings, or you may only intend to share things with friends, but there really isn't any privacy on social media. And the posts that you make can live out there forever. And what this reporter found is that this college student had some old racist tweets from when he was in high school, and felt compelled to include that as part of the story. And so it created a lot of negative backlash for the Iowa State student who had donated this money to the children's hospital. I believe he was about to get a sponsorship from Busch Light. Then, of course, Busch Light withdrew that. Now, this process is often referred to as doxing. When you essentially go and look at someone's social media post from way back, And you tend to find, whoops, let me get rid of that. Tend to find negative information about them. Well, in this case, it backfired on the reporter. Some folks went back and looked at this particular reporter's social media post from several years ago when he was a teenager, and found that he had said some really unsavory things. That he had used the word gay as a pejorative to talk about, to refer to gay individuals. That he had expressed hateful posts towards police officers, and had posts that included lyrics that also included the N-word. And the reporter was then later fired by the newspaper for having this in his background. What I tend to find kind of disingenuous about this particular case is that if it was the newspaper's policy to essentially look at the social media feed of anyone that they interviewed, I have a hard time believing that they didn't do that for reporters that they were going to hire. And certainly that would have prevented the embarrassment that they had from a case like this. And this is one of the main things that I wanted then to focus on today, is this phenomenon of selfie sabotage. Because ultimately, we are responsible for the post that we make. No one, hurt the reporter in this case except himself. And so what do I mean specifically by selfie sabotage? Things beyond, posting something that is, racist or insensitive to certain groups. Well, it could be something perhaps a little more, innocent, that, for instance, you post, images of yourself, at a party, maybe drinking alcohol, which is not, illegal unless you are under the age, but it certainly presents you in a certain light that doesn't have all of the context, right? Kind of what we saw with the Covington Catholic case that I mentioned at the outset. Here's another one, tweeting angry comments that may be interpreted as a threat. I'm sure you're familiar with the expression of, "Oh, I really want to kill that guy," right? And you don't mean it literally. However, it's very difficult to understand that kind of context and nuance in a social media post. Or posting, other types of career endangering messages. For instance, bad mouthing an employer or a former employer. And I've known students who have lost internships, really good paid internship opportunities for something that they had posted on social media, several years back. So it's something that we need to be aware of. I was kind of heartened by what you said, Michael, about, I tend to not post too much. I really like to just go and see what other people are posting. But that's not always typical, is that oftentimes people tend to be very eager to share. And certainly, social media is about, connection and sharing, but we don't necessarily take the time to think about what some of those consequences might be. So let me give you a few other examples, and I reach back a little bit further for some of these, and I'll give you all a quick trigger warning that there is some unsavory language in this particular tweet that you can see here. This one goes back about 9 years. A teenager in Clarksville, Ohio, had tweeted this out during then President Obama's State of the Union speech. And this is, this is not the words I would have chosen, but she probably did not mean to imply that she intended to go out herself and assassinate President Obama. She was more likely than not just unhappy with something that he was presenting in his speech. But clearly, without knowing that context, this reads as a threat. And the very next day, the speech was in prime time. She tweeted that out during the evening. The next morning, Secret Service was outside her front door and doing an investigation because they interpreted this as a threat, and they have to take all threats seriously. Here's another example, this from University of Dayton back in 2013. There was a riot that started, and this wasn't a protest, but it was a bunch of young people drinking. And as you can see here, there's an image from where they smashed out a car window. I believe they might have set another car on fire. There was all sorts of destruction of property, maybe even another car that had been turned over. And they had, posted, some images of what they were doing. But there were also some that simply posted, hey, I'm heading down to, the street where this was going on, inviting, other people to join them. And essentially, the students wound up doing the work of law enforcement for them. The police were able to identify several of the students who were involved by what they themselves had posted on their social media accounts. And so this has become a tool for law enforcement as well. So those are some more of the extreme examples. But here's what I would like you to consider more generally, is that well over half of employers these days will look at an applicant's social media profiles. And over half of employers have said that they have reconsidered applicants that they considered to have made, inappropriate social media posts, if you will. What I find interesting about that is that, while there are a lot of us who are social media users, and some of us use it quite frequently, and for journalists, you are these days expected to use it as part of your work, or at the very least, you expect that journalists have social media profiles. And this is why I brought up the Des Moines Register case from a couple of years ago. Close to 80% of employers do not provide any kind of social media training. And so we really are left, to our own devices when thinking about this. And it can be, again, be very little, things like bad-mouthing a current or former employer. Several people have been caught lying on social media. So like they call in sick for work when really they, intended to, take the day off, go to the park, go fishing, do whatever, and then post that on social media so they get caught. Or simply, presenting yourself, acting in a way that could at the very least be perceived as irresponsible. So what I like people to, consider then is maybe we need a little more social media savvy, especially considering how much time we spend engaged with social media. 83% of U.S. teens between the ages of 14 and 18 are on social media. The next part really troubles me, is that more than 90% show names and photos of themselves, show their names, they show photos. You provide a lot of information, and you don't know how that is going to be used or interpreted. Perhaps even more troubling, over 40% of teens had either sent or received sexually explicit images of themselves or a classmate. So there's a lot of concerns about safety, privacy, personal reputation, and responsibility that is at stake here. Besides, some of the more rote consequences. Oh, I'm sorry, did someone turn their mic on?
I did. I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so about what you were saying about how employers, I'm sorry, this is really late, but like how you were saying about employers look at your social medias and stuff like that and consider the decision. What about like there's just like how when you have a such thing as like a professional, like, how do I say this? Basically, you wouldn't act the same way you do at home as you would at school, like kind of like a professional.
Right.
Like a professional attitude you use at like a
Right.
workplace or like a school, whatever.
Right.
What if that's different from what it was in social media? Why would they just like I don't understand it. Like they basically just look at your social media and jump to conclusions?
Yes, they can. They're certainly free to do that. And so that's a really good question, Andre. And I think that's the kind of thing that takes people by surprise. We're used to having different personas, right? There is, me when I am, say, for instance, teaching a class and I'm, professionally attired, right? Versus when I'm, like hanging out at home in street clothes, watching sports, that kind of thing. And so our expectation is that, employers will be able to, see the difference of those. But that's just simply not the case, as unfair as it is. That we, provide this kind of looking glass, into our lives. And although we may think of these domains as being compartmentalized, employment, yet it can, and it has literally cost people their jobs. And there are social media platforms that are designed specifically for that kind of professional appearance. I think that you're thinking of, Andrea, like LinkedIn, for instance. Or I shared earlier with you, the link to Muckrack, which is one for journalists, and we may cultivate a different image of ourselves on those, but there's simply nothing in the law to stop prospective employers from looking at our private. We tend to think of it as private social media, but social media is anything but private. I don't know if that answered your question, or perhaps just added a little bit to the frustration of the point you were raising.
It did, kind of.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, feel free to chime in with some more if they come up. Here's some criminal things to think about with social media. Child pornography. A lot of people don't realize that any sexually explicit image of someone under the age of 18 is considered child pornography. Doesn't matter whether you received this image from a boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other, consensually. If that person is under the age of 18, that is child pornography, and you are now in possession of it, and it is a felony. Nothing else matters than that. We've seen several cases, including some here locally, of these where high school students have shared sexually explicit images with each other, and it started a child pornography investigation. Defamation. Which is something you'll learn about in a journalism media law class, but it's simply false defamatory statements that you might make about someone can happen pretty easily, such as the case that I shared with you from Covington Catholic. You only have 280 characters in a tweet, but that's enough to falsely defame someone. And as I always like to remind my students in my media law class, a lot of times it's not about whether you're right or wrong under the law, but whether you can afford to defend yourself. And so I tend to prefer to err on the side of caution. And then the last point here, I think, really goes to your question, Andrea. When we think about the social media posts as being what you were talking about, people just simply looking up your profile, but it could also be admissible in a court of law. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but typically statements made outside of a court, with someone speaking on the witness stand, would be considered hearsay, not admissible. However, the courts have considered anyone who posts something on social media. Doesn't matter what your privacy settings are. If you posted something on social media, the courts view it as an intent to communicate to the public. And so maybe that is a better answer to your question of that we may think of these realms as being distinct, but even just in a very day-to-day sense, if we post something on our Twitter, our social media, whatever that platform is, legally and otherwise, it's considered, an intent to communicate publicly. So think before you click. Digital trails can last forever. That genie doesn't go back in the bottle. What you post on social media can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. And so whether you intend to be a journalist or not, we're all storytellers with these platforms. And I ask you just to think critically about what kind of stories do I want to tell about myself. Think about how people who might interpret, things that I post. Think about the different ways they can be interpreted. And so just have that moment to take a breath. And one of the things that I like to tell my sons is, read the news. When you see these kind of cases come up, like the ones I've presented here today, think about, oh, wow, that could have been me. And, what could this person have done differently that wouldn't have resulted in such a bad outcome? And by that, I certainly don't mean to say avoid social media, stay off social media. I don't agree with that either. I personally feel like the good outweighs the harms. At the same time, we do have to be aware of the harms. So with that, I want to take just a quick pause. I have a few more slides, and I could talk about video recording police activity. But before I move on to that, I was curious if you had any questions, and I also wanted to check in with Mr. Gericke on the time, about how much more time we have left.
Time-wise, Dr. Blevins, you're doing really well. We can aim to be wrapped up. So we started around 3:45, so 4:45 is good. So you still got another say 20-ish minutes or so.
Okay, great.
You're doing perfect.
Awesome. All right then. Well, if there's not any other questions or comments about that first part, I wanted to talk about something that should be on our radar screen as journalists and citizens, and something that can involve quite a bit of danger. And I expect that you might recognize the two images that I have here. There have been so many cases of citizens and journalists, but mostly citizens who have recorded police activity, and those videos have gone viral. There's so many, I simply could not get into every single case here. So I picked one that has captured headlines across the country last year, and currently a trial is going on now. The image on the that you see on the left is George Floyd, and the image on the right is Derek Chauvin, the police officer who is currently on trial. And I believe the defense rested today, and so I think the jury is deliberating now. Who sat on with his knee on George Floyd's neck until he died. I was careful to crop this particular image so that you don't see George Floyd laying underneath him, although that video, that image, well, I believe was taken by a 17-year-old teenager who happened to witness Floyd's arrest and ultimately his death. I didn't want to share an image of him dying. I tend to prefer to think of people what they were like when they were alive as when they were dead, but I'd also wanted to provide that that viral moment here. And so a lot of questions that we need to be thinking about is the legality of recording police activity and what our rights are under the law. And so the next few minutes, I would like to spend some time to talk about mobile phone videos of police and the First Amendment. As a journalist, I tend to have a very expansive view of the First Amendment, and I personally feel that we should have at least some First Amendment right to record police. As journalists, we're part of the system of checks and balances in this country. Journalists have long had access, just as private citizens do, to the courts, to public records, making public records, requests. If we are truly a country that and have a government that's of, for, and by the people, then we need to be able to scrutinize the activity of our law enforcement and of our government. And so the question I pose here that frankly comes to me quite a bit from students, well, don't we have a First Amendment right to record police, especially in public places? And while I wish I could say under the law that we do, the correct answer is that the lower courts have been mixed on this. And so there is, frankly, a lot of discrepancy in what our rights are. There's a lot of unknown in what as we like to say, the four corners of the law are. So I'm going to show you a couple of court decisions, just a quick summary of each. That gives you an example of how we have very different interpretations in our court system about this question. So the first two cases I want to discuss involve people who were arrested for recording police. These cases happened in two different states, and these are both federal court cases, but they happened in different districts, different circuits, and so we got different interpretations of the law. This is the decision that, as a journalist, I am least happy with. This is a case of Field versus City of Philadelphia. This was 5 years ago. We had a federal court in Pennsylvania said, absent any criticism or challenge to police conduct, the state of Pennsylvania does not recognize a First Amendment right to observe and record without some expressive conduct. Photographing police is not, as a matter of law, expressive activity, end quote. So what does that mean? Well, essentially, the court here is saying that recording police isn't expressive, if you will, or creative. And to me, this is a troubling decision, because it almost, to me, it kind of equates, the First Amendment and free expression as only like something that could be subject to copyright. It's as if they took the definition of copyright, something that is, creative and expressive. That's the only thing that, that could, be, pertinent to this case. Where I see the First Amendment is having a much broader role that isn't just about creative expression, that, it's also about holding those in power, particularly our government, particularly law enforcement, accountable. That should be at the heart of what good journalism does, but it should also be a right of every citizen. So the way that I like to think of this case is, okay, video recording police's conduct, not speech, of following the rationale of this particular court decision, unless your intent is to criticize. Where for me, it's like, of course it should be, with the intent to criticize. That's implicit. I'm going to go back to this image here, the one on the right of the police officer with his knee on the neck of George Floyd. I don't think this teenager shot this video because she thought it was entertaining or expressive in some ways. I think it was clearly to criticize the conduct of the police officer in this case. And you have to wonder, is this the kind of case that would have been brought to trial without this video having gone viral? And I would hate to think that this teenager did not have a First Amendment right to record something that happened on a public street that anyone could have seen that was passing by at that day and at that time. All right. And so you could tell my ire is getting up as a journalist with that particular decision. So let me move on to another lower court decision. This one reached a very different conclusion. I like this decision better. It was 2 years prior to the field decision that I mentioned earlier. Here we had another person that was arrested simply for recording police activity. But in this case, a federal court in Massachusetts, different state, said that there is a First Amendment right to record police officers during traffic stops, subject to reasonable restrictions. And to me, this sounds more like what the law should be or is. It's certainly a broader view of the First Amendment, but also recognize that, okay, there could be reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions to recording police. So, for instance, if there was chemical, if there was an active shooter situation, and clear the area to the of individuals, then yeah, that should outweigh, your First Amendment right at that time to record police, right? So, what this case also then invites me to think about, and I should invite us all to think about, is, well, we really need some better jurisprudence of, what are the boundaries then? Should there be a First Amendment right to record police? Certainly should be subject to some reasonable restrictions, but let's articulate what some of those restrictions should be. Certainly when someone's safety is at stake, you wouldn't want to interfere with police activity, but there should be some qualified or at least limited right to video record police. Now, I keep mentioning that I keep referring the first two cases I referred to as lower court decisions. One of the things that you'll learn about if you take a media law course is kind of the hierarchy of the U.S. court system. And the U.S. Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of what the Constitution means and how it's applied. And courts have to adjudicate consistently with that. But when it comes to the lower courts, if there's not a Supreme Court decision, their ruling stands. And so in the U.S., you can get different interpretations of the law depending on the jurisdiction of a court. So as things stand now in Pennsylvania, you don't have a First Amendment right to record police, whereas in Massachusetts, you do, subject to some, reasonable restrictions. But typically when this happens, when you have these lower courts that they're inconsistent in their rulings, this is where the Supreme Court should step in and provide clarity. And so as journalists in particular, we are waiting for that. Having, clarity from the Supreme Court would be preferable. And obviously, as you can tell by my tone, journalists tend to not be very pleased with the Fields decision out of Pennsylvania. So it might lead us to think about them. Well, what are some reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions? Certainly, police have very broad discretion to take reasonable steps to protect their safety and that of the public. And we have to, recognize and respect that as well. And, for someone such as myself that is definitely a proponent of there being a First Amendment right to record police, I would also certainly accept that it should be subject to reasonable restrictions. But what really troubles me about the Field decision, and that leads to my question here, is should peacefully recording of an arrest or other police activity in a public space that does not interfere with their duties and there is no, safety threat, should that be subject to any limitation at all? And I'll take just a quick pause here before I talk about one Supreme Court case to see, Michael or Andrea, if either of you would like to, to weigh in here, if you've put any, happen to have put any thought about these questions or recording police.
Me personally, I have a strong decision about this, and I think that I feel that if we're recording police, it's for a reason. Or if somebody is recording
Yes.
police for a reason, like a threatening reason. Like, I don't know if you heard about, there was just a new one that came up where this lady police officer, I guess she was a veteran and has been in the police force for a very long time, and she got a taser and a handgun mixed up and had killed somebody.
Right.
If that was not recorded, then who was to tell that it actually happened? And stuff like that needs to be heard. So therefore, and there's also situations like when the George Floyd, the George Floyd, I can't say his name, but you know who I'm talking about.
I do.
I watched his video and the cop is sitting there saying, "Put your phone away, put your phone away, put your phone away."
Yes.
Right? And if the cop is doing nothing wrong, then why did he not want him to record?
Exactly. You and I are kindred spirits on this, Andrea. And that is what I find so troubling about the Field decision from, Pennsylvania is, and I agree with you 100%, that, I don't even know if this guy would even have been brought to trial if that had not been, recorded. But that, if the Field decision is the precedent, then you're going to have people that are likely to self-censor. They're likely to not record if it's something that, they could potentially be arrested for doing. And, the facts in both of the cases, the more recent one that you mentioned, which also happened outside of Minneapolis, where George Floyd did. Clearly they were able to shoot that video without interfering with what police were doing, but it provides a certain level of scrutiny and oversight that is necessary, and not just for journalism, but really for broader social justice movement here. There is a real value to being able to record police doing those things. And since you brought it up, Andrea, I'm going to take a comment that you made and use it to transition into the kind of last thing I wanted to talk about, which, is like stop recording, stop recording, stop recording. Well, while we don't have a Supreme Court case that has, applied the First Amendment to this question, and I hope that they do take this up sometime sooner rather than later. But in covering, these types of things, what would have happened if that police officer, instead of saying stop recording, had wanted to take the phone from this woman, or I should say this teenager who was filming George Floyd, or in some of these other cases as well? Well, here we do have a Supreme Court decision, but it's on a separate question. It's not on the right to record police, but it is about police confiscating or seizing mobile phones. All right. And this, 2 years prior to the Field decision, this was a unanimous Supreme Court decision. And what's really interesting about the facts of this case, and I don't mean to confuse you all by mentioning the facts of this case, because this was several cases that had been consolidated into one. But the case that this is named for, Riley, here you had police who had pulled over someone, and the person had active search warrants. There were guns in this person's car that were suspected of being involved in a shooting, and it turns out that they were used in a shooting. But the police, in this case, took the person's mobile phone and searched through it, and then found other evidence that this person was in a gang, and there was also evidence linking him to these murders that the guns were involved in. And that evidence was thrown out. But this case has applicability to journalists or to any citizen who is recording police or is recording a protest, that if a police officer wants to seize your mobile phone, and by seize I mean take it. And here's what the Supreme Court said, that there is a Fourth Amendment right that prohibits police from seizing a person's mobile phone and searching through its contents. The only way that a police officer can lawfully seize the device is if the person is being arrested. All right. So now, if you're being arrested, they may take your phone, and they do that lawfully. What was interesting in the Riley case is that it wasn't under arrest until after they had searched his phone. So they shouldn't have done it in the order that they did, and they could have gotten a warrant for it. The only way that they're supposed to go through the contents is with a search warrant. So this would, applying this case then to citizens or journalists recording police activity and wanting to take phone or delete images or to see what you've been recording, this suggests that they cannot do that. And so that I consider to be a win principally for for journalists and for citizens who are recording police activity. However, there are a couple important qualifications that need to be made here. One, police may inspect a mobile phone to make sure that it is not a weapon. That's different than taking it and keeping it from your possession. All right. And then here's the other, and this is the more significant qualification that I want to leave you all with. And that is, although the Supreme Court, the highest law of the land, has said that police cannot lawfully seize the device and cannot lawfully search your device without a warrant, failure to comply with the immediate demands of a police officer, no matter whether that officer is acting within the boundaries of the law or not, may involve life-threatening consequences. And I cannot emphasize that enough. And I tend to be a very cautious person. And so in such a case, I would prefer personally to live to tell the tale afterwards. Officers do have very broad discretion for what they, perceive to be a threat. And so, how much, you would want to resist an officer who is asking to take your phone. Wow. That is such a personal decision, and again, can involve life-threatening consequences that I can't answer that, that question for you. Personally, I would prefer to live to tell the tale and to assert my rights afterwards, alive and well. So I'm going to stop there. I think we have at least a couple minutes left. If you have any questions for me.
Yeah, Drea just had to head out just a minute ago. She had somewhere to be and something to do, but we still got Michael in here, and so she just left at the end of that last slide, and she's really appreciative of everything. But Michael, I guess if you have any specific questions about any of the topics about just related to social media and journalism, or any of the court cases, or just anything in general about it, I mean, go ahead if you can think of anything. But
well, I was holding the scent for a while, but I think that it should be required, like, for police officers to have their their chest cameras on, and there should be nothing stopping you from recording, because why would they sell cameras at stores, like public places where you can get them easily? You should be able to do what you want at your own freedom. Like, even if it is their privacy, they're in public, so it's for everyone to see.
That's right. And one thing that you'll learn in a media law class, Michael, is that there is no such thing as privacy in public places, that you have no reasonable expectation of privacy. And so that would not be a valid argument for, police to make. It would have to be for some other, it should be under the law for some other, reasonable restrictions like safety, right? But for someone who just doesn't want to be recorded, if you're in a public place, that doesn't really matter, at least under the law.
Yeah, got anything else, Michael? Really good point. Any questions? Anything you got?
No, not really.
Sounds good. Well, Dr. Blevins, like I said, this was recorded, and I really, really appreciate your time in this and putting this together and just being willing to present on a topic that not a lot of high schoolers get exposure to. So thank you so much for this.
Well, happy to do it. Happy to come back and talk anytime too, maybe when the pandemic's over.
Yeah, and I'd love to do something in person at that point, some point in the next fall or spring or whenever that would be. But yeah, we just appreciate you a whole lot, Dr. Blevins. And I guess if it's okay with you, is it okay if I give out your email to Michael and Andrea if they have any questions?
Yeah. Awesome. Feel free to give out my my email. Just be sure to use the UC one. I check it more frequently than I do my Gmail. My Gmail tends to collect a lot of junk mail.
Gotcha. So you
have my UC email, and you feel free to share my Twitter handle as well. I try to share some things that way too.
Okay. Andrea, I see you hop back on for a sec. Any questions you have or anything else you want to add for Dr. Blevins?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hop off. I got a phone call.
All good. All good. You were just right at the end of the presentation anyway, so all is well. Well, Dr. Blevins, unless you have anything else, I can go ahead and hit that stop recording button and we can end it from here.
Sounds good.